The evening started like any other family celebration, but I knew deep down it would not stay that way. My sister Emily had just gotten engaged, and the entire family had gathered at her apartment for a dinner meant to celebrate. The table was perfectly set, candles burning softly, the smell of roasted lamb and fresh bread filling the air. Everyone chatted politely, smiled, laughed, and exchanged congratulations. But from the moment Jared, her fiancé, arrived, something in the room shifted. Jared always had a way of commanding attention. He was tall, confident, and always seemed to know exactly what to say to make people laugh. Everyone loved him. Everyone. That is, except me. I had never gotten along with him, not because I disliked him, but because he had a way of making me feel small. Subtle at first, little jabs hidden in jokes, but noticeable if you paid attention. Tonight, I thought, would be no different. We sat down to eat. The first course came, and Jared had already begun. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he leaned over and whispered to Emily loud enough for me to hear, "I hope she doesn't embarrass herself tonight." I kept my expression neutral, smiling politely, but inside a spark of irritation ignited. I took a sip of water and ignored him, assuming he would grow tired of his own arrogance. But he didn't. He never did. He started with small digs, pretending they were jokes. He commented on my old suit, saying it was charming in a vintage sort of way, the kind of comment that made everyone glance at me and chuckle awkwardly. I clenched my jaw but kept my composure. Emily's smile faltered. She glanced at me with concern, but I shook my head slightly, signaling that I was fine. I wasn't fine, not really, but I had learned to mask anger with calmness. Jared, however, seemed to thrive on it. As the main course was served, the tension grew. Jared leaned back in his chair, glass of wine in hand, and let out a deep laugh. "Honestly," he said, turning toward the rest of the family with that smug smile, "I don't know why she even tries. She doesn't belong here." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, but because he said them with such confidence, as if everyone around the table should agree. I felt my hands tighten around my fork, the metal biting into my palms. My vision narrowed, focusing only on him. My family looked uncomfortable. Emily's eyes were wide, hurt flashing across her face. But she said nothing. My heart raced, a mix of anger and humiliation twisting inside me. Everyone else either laughed nervously or avoided eye contact, pretending they hadn't heard. But I had. I had heard, and I would not forget. I excused myself without a word, leaving a small trail of murmurs behind. In the quiet of the hallway, my breathing came fast. The anger wasn't just from embarrassment. It was the sense of being dismissed, of being belittled in front of people who should have cared. I closed the door to the study and leaned against it, letting the cold wood steady me. I had always been patient, always known how to hold myself together, but tonight the old rules didn't seem enough. I sat at the desk, staring at the papers scattered across it, but the numbers and letters blurred. All I could see was Jared's smirk, the way he had made me feel invisible and unworthy. The dinner had been a test, a display of power disguised as humor, and he had one, at least for now. But I didn't want to just win back my pride. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. I wanted him to understand, in a way he never would expect, that arrogance and cruelty had consequences. The night passed slowly. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside, thinking through everything that had happened. I replayed each moment in my mind, analyzing his words, his tone, his expression. There was something almost childish about the way he laughed, a need to dominate, to humiliate. And yet, beneath it, I saw vulnerability too, though it was buried under layers of ego and entitlement. That vulnerability would be my key, though I didn't fully know how yet. By the time dawn approached, a plan had begun to form in my mind. Revenge is a dangerous thought, I knew that, and yet the desire wasn't just about payback. It was about restoring balance, about claiming the dignity that had been stolen in a single cruel sentence. I didn't want to yell, confront, or expose him in public. I wanted something far more effective, something that would hit where it mattered most: his sense of control, his confidence, the very arrogance that made him believe he could ridicule others without consequence. I thought about the hours ahead, how I could position myself so that he would be the one scrambling, the one pleading. He had been careless, trusting that charm alone would protect him. Everyone has a weakness, I reminded myself. Everyone. And Jared's was exactly that. He believed no one could ever truly touch him. Tonight, I would prove him wrong, but I would do it on my terms, silently, strategically. Without losing myself in the process, Emily knocked lightly on the door, breaking my chain of thoughts. I opened it a crack, forcing a calm smile, hiding the storm inside. She asked if I was okay, concern lacing her tone. I nodded, assuring her I was fine. She left, trusting my words, unaware that I was already plotting a way to turn the tables. At the time she returned to the dining room, I had already begun mapping the path to what would happen next. As the sun rose, I felt a strange clarity. The anger from last night had cooled, replaced by determination. This wasn't about hatred. It was about justice, about showing someone who underestimated me that their actions had consequences. I had learned long ago that patience often outweighs impulsive reaction, and now, armed with calm and focus, I would wait for the perfect moment. Jared, of course, would not see it coming. He would walk into the next encounter, full of confidence, smugness, and charm. Unaware that the events of the night before had shifted the balance, he believed the world moved at his pace, that he could manipulate and laugh without ever paying a price. He was wrong. And when he realized it, I wanted him to understand fully, not just through humiliation, but through the complete collapse of the illusion of control he so desperately clung to. The morning light fell across my desk as I prepared for the day. Each action deliberate, each thought focused on the outcome I desired. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt alive, sharp, and ready. The betrayal of last night had lit a fire, one that demanded careful handling. Revenge is not just a reaction. It is strategy, patience, and timing. And I had all three in my favor. I left the study, my mind clear, my steps measured. The dinner had ended, but the story had only begun. And somewhere, Jared, laughing in his confidence, had no idea what awaited him. Tonight, he would learn a lesson he could never forget. Tonight, the tables would turn. And I, who had been humiliated just hours ago, would hold the key to his reckoning. The hours after the dinner stretched in a strange tension, heavy and electric. I didn't leave my apartment, didn't answer calls. I sat at my desk, tracing possibilities, imagining every scenario that could unfold with Jared. Revenge, I realized, was not a single action, but a careful game. Each move calculated, each word measured. I thought about his arrogance, how he laughed without thought, how he assumed no one could ever truly challenge him. That would be his undoing. By mid-morning, I had gathered what I needed. Jared had made mistakes, left traces of himself in places he thought were private. Documents, financial records, tiny slips of overconfidence, all waiting for someone patient enough to notice. And I was patient. I went through everything methodically, checking, double-checking, confirming the leverage I held. The thrill of control made my pulse quicken. I had power now, silent, invisible, and absolute. I imagined Jared walking into my living room, confident, smiling, ready to charm me again. He would expect nothing, anticipate no resistance, and yet I would be ready. I thought about what I wanted from him: not chaos, not public embarrassment, but clarity. The collapse of his smug superiority, a realization that actions have consequences. I wanted him to feel the fear, the helplessness, the understanding. That respect cannot be bought or forced, it must be earned. I rehearsed the conversation in my mind. Every tone, every pause, every subtle hint. I pictured him trying to mask his growing unease, trying to charm me, trying to bluff his way out, only to discover that bluffing would not work this time. I would not allow it. The moment had to be precise, striking, unavoidable. Timing, I knew, was everything. One misstep and it would be wasted. One hesitation and the moment would pass. As the afternoon sun climbed, I thought about Jared's laugh, the way it had pierced me at dinner, the smugness that had made me grind my teeth. Haunted me not because it was cruel, but because it showed the depth of his confidence. The certainty that no one could touch him. And yet, that same confidence revealed a weakness. Arrogance blinds people, and Jared's eyes had been too bright with self-assurance to see what was coming. I would make him see. I started with subtle messages, casually dropping hints of my knowledge, nothing direct, nothing overt. Just enough to unsettle him, to make him question, to plant the idea that perhaps, just perhaps, someone saw beyond the mask. He responded predictably, confident, dismissive, charming, but I noticed the tiny cracks the way he lingered on certain words. The hesitation in his replies, the faint tension in his smile. My patience became a weapon, sharpening as I watched him unknowingly step closer to the trap I had set by late afternoon. The plan had taken full shape. I arranged for him to come by under the pretense of continuing the conversation from last night, a casual follow-up on the engagement dinner. He arrived exactly when expected, smiling, radiating the arrogance that had so angered me. He didn't see it yet, but that smile was the last shred of security he would have. I closed the door behind him, the click of the lock a quiet signal that the rules had changed. I sat across from him, calm, collected, and let the silence stretch. Jared shifted in his chair, glanced at the papers I had left casually on the coffee table, and asked what they were. My voice was slow, deliberate, almost teasing as I said, "Numbers, your numbers." He leaned forward, a mixture of curiosity and caution in his eyes, trying to read me. He wanted a joke, an explanation, some harmless comment. I gave him none. Then I spoke, each word precise. "You'll need $100 million to fix this." Jared laughed at first, the sound full of disbelief and condescension, as if I had said something absurd. I didn't flinch. I let the silence grow, pressing the weight of the statement onto him, and then I watched him falter. His eyes narrowed, confusion replacing confidence. He tried to hide it, to laugh it off, but the seeds of panic had been planted. I could see it, the slow realization creeping across his face that he was no longer in control. The jokes, the charm, the smirk, they had failed him. For the first time, Jared experienced uncertainty, the kind that shakes the ground beneath your feet. And I was not angry. I was satisfied, calm, observing the unraveling. I did not need to shout, to threaten, or to humiliate. His mind was already doing the work for me. Hours passed as we talked, carefully, indirectly, building the pressure without showing force. He asked questions, tried to negotiate, hinted at opportunities to escape the consequences. I let him. Each attempt to regain control only tightened the invisible trap. I was always one step ahead, never overplaying, never letting emotion dictate action. It was a psychological game now, and I was in command. As evening approached, Jared's posture changed. He slumped slightly, shoulders dropping, eyes no longer sharp, but searching. The arrogance was gone, replaced with the realization that he was exposed, vulnerable, and utterly dependent on the mercy I controlled. I observed every flicker of emotion, fear, desperation, regret, and a flicker of humility buried under pride. The transformation was fascinating, almost beautiful in its inevitability. By the time night fell, Jared was trembling, visibly shaken, and I knew the moment had arrived. I leaned forward, voice quiet, controlled. "This is not just about money. This is about understanding. It's about knowing that actions have consequences. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And right now, you've learned the hard way." He nodded, unable to speak, his arrogance shattered, his mind racing through every misstep, every careless word, every laugh he had thrown my way. I offered him a choice, a lifeline wrapped in humility. Acknowledge your mistake, learn and take responsibility, or continue in arrogance and watch everything collapse. He chose to beg, to plead, to recognize the gravity of his situation. And yet, even as he did, I felt no triumph, no malicious satisfaction. The victory was not in humiliation, but in clarity. In the lesson being understood, throughout the conversation, I wrestled with my own emotions. Revenge had been my initial spark, but now it was tempered with awareness. I could see how quickly cruelty can turn to vulnerability, how easily arrogance can blind judgment, and how powerful patience and control can be. My mind was sharp, my resolve clear, and I understood something crucial. True leverage lies not in force, but in the ability to guide someone to the realization of their own fragility. Jared's pleas grew more desperate, his voice trembling, eyes wide, the first cracks of humility showing through layers of pride. I observed quietly, never interrupting, letting him sink into the understanding of his own mistakes. Each word he uttered, each apology, each frantic attempt to negotiate, reinforced the lesson: arrogance invites reckoning. I was no longer angry. I was teaching, demonstrating, revealing the cost of carelessness and cruelty. By the end of the night, Jared had been transformed, his confidence shattered, his ego subdued. He was now fully aware of the consequences of underestimating others. I felt a strange calm, a satisfaction not born of vengeance but of control, clarity, and justice delivered without chaos. I had orchestrated a scenario where arrogance met reality, where patience and precision outweighed impulsive action, and where the lesson would linger long after I left the room. I knew this was not the end. The final moment, the ultimate decision, would come soon, but for now, the groundwork was complete. Jared had seen the shadow of consequences, and I had guided him there. The satisfaction was subtle, psychological, profound. This was not about money, though the threat was clear. It was about understanding, reflection, and transformation. I had not lost myself to anger. I had harnessed it, shaped it into strategy, and executed it flawlessly. Tonight, Jared had learned something more valuable than any financial loss. Kay had learned humility, vulnerability, and the weight of his actions. Kay and I had learned something about myself. Patience, observation, and calm strategy are often far more powerful than rage. The night closed with me leaving the apartment quietly, leaving him to wrestle with the new reality I had introduced. The game was far from over, but the balance had shifted, the stakes raised, and the lesson firmly planted. Night had fallen completely, and the city outside glimmered with lights that seemed distant, insignificant, compared to the tension inside my apartment. Jared sat across from me, still trembling, his confident facade completely shattered. His hands shook slightly as he reached for a glass of water, and for the first time, he looked small, utterly human, stripped of arrogance and charm. The transformation from dinner's smug, laughing fiancé to this vulnerable, desperate man had been total, and I watched carefully, knowing the final moment had arrived. He spoke first, voice low, unsteady, trying to find the words that could save him. I can fix this. I'll get the money. Tell me what I need to do." His eyes searched mine, pleading, a mixture of fear and disbelief reflected in every glance. He didn't fully understand how precarious his position was, but he sensed the truth. He had crossed a line, underestimated me, and now the tables had turned completely. I leaned back, folding my hands, keeping my expression calm. Calmness, I had learned, was far more effective than yelling, threats, or displays of anger. Power is quiet, steady, unrelenting. I let the silence stretch, pressing the weight of my presence onto him. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, aware that I held the cards, the knowledge of his secrets, the leverage I possessed, the control over his next moves, all of it rested with me. One wrong word from him, one desperate attempt at charm, and the full gravity of his reckoning would crash down. $100 million, I said finally, deliberately, letting the number hang in the air like a challenge. Jared's eyes widened, disbelief overtaking him. He laughed nervously at first, trying to mask panic with humor. "You're joking," he said, voice tight, trying to force the situation back into familiar territory. He wanted to charm me, to turn this into a joke, but I remained still, unflinching. I shook my head slightly, calmly, almost sadly. No joke. $100 million. Or the consequences of ignoring the situation entirely. My voice was even precise. He had mocked me at dinner, ridiculed me, treated me as if I were invisible. Now, the invisible line between confidence and catastrophe had been crossed, and he was forced to recognize the truth. He swallowed hard, trying to hide the tremor in his throat. The way his once confident body language had crumpled into something unsteady and vulnerable. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his expression. "Please," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. I'll do anything. Just don't destroy me." That word, destroy, hung in the room like a threat, though it came from him, not me. I realized then that revenge had evolved. It was no longer about anger or humiliation. It was about teaching, guiding, making him understand the weight of arrogance and the consequences of carelessness. I studied him carefully, noting every subtle movement, the shift of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he struggled to maintain composure. Every gesture told a story, revealed a crack in the armor of his ego. And I saw something else, too, a flicker of humility, the first genuine acknowledgement of his mistakes. He had always believed he could dominate any room, any person with charm and confidence. That belief was gone now, replaced with a raw, frightening vulnerability. I let him stew in the silence, letting him feel the magnitude of his mistake without uttering another word. The room seemed smaller, the shadows longer, as if even the walls conspired to press him into awareness. He shifted in his chair, swallowed, and finally looked up at me, eyes wide, pleading. I don't know how this happened." Thought I was careful. Thought his words trailed off, failing inadequate to bridge the gap between arrogance and consequence. "You weren't careful?" I said simply, leaning forward slightly. "You laughed. You mocked. You assumed no one could touch you. That was your mistake. And now you're here facing what you refused to see before. The choice is yours. Learn from this, or continue as you are and pay the cost." I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten him. The words themselves carried weight enough. And he knew it. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, and he leaned closer, voice trembling, eyes desperate. "I'll do it. I'll get the money. Just don't ruin me." And in that moment, I understood fully. He had learned, the lesson had been delivered, and the moment of revenge was complete. But the satisfaction I felt was not the sharp sweetness of vindication. It was quiet, measured, almost reflective. This wasn't about destruction. It was about teaching, about making him understand the consequences of arrogance. I stood, letting the air shift, letting him feel the full weight of his humility. "You'll have to make choices differently now," I said, voice calm, steady, unyielding. "Respect is not a joke. Arrogance is not strength. The next time you encounter someone you think is beneath you, remember this moment." His eyes, wide and uncertain, followed me as I moved toward the door. I didn't wait for a response. There was none needed. The lesson had been absorbed. For the first time, I felt a sense of release. The tension that had gripped me since dinner was gone, replaced by clarity. Revenge, I realized, is not about anger. It is about balance. It's about taking control, asserting power over a situation, and guiding someone to see the error of their ways without losing yourself in the process. And Jared, stripped of his confidence, humbled before me, would carry that lesson with him. He tried to speak again, words fumbling, voice shaking. I understand, he said finally. I see now, I'll be careful. I won't, but I didn't respond. I let him fill the space with his own acknowledgement. Sometimes the most powerful thing is not what you say, but what you allow someone to realize on their own. As I left the apartment, the night air hit me with a cool, calming presence. The city lights glimmered around me, but I felt untouchable, grounded, in control. Jared's fate was no longer my responsibility. The lesson had been delivered. The arrogance that had hurt me was broken, and I had accomplished what I had set out to do. Satisfaction was not derived from wealth, humiliation, or chaos. It came from seeing the truth revealed, watching the consequences of his actions unfold, and knowing that he would never underestimate me again. Walking down the quiet streets, I reflected on the path that had brought me here. The anger that had sparked revenge had been tempered by patience and strategy. I had let him experience the full weight of his mistakes, and I had emerged unscathed, in control.com and confident. The thrill was not in destruction, but in clarity, in the understanding that power is not wielded with force alone, but with careful, deliberate action. By the time I returned to my apartment, the city had quieted, the lights dimmed, and the world felt still. I looked out at the skyline, thinking of Jared, thinking of the lesson he had just received, and I realized something profound. Revenge is not truly satisfying if it only destroys. True satisfaction comes from teaching, from guiding, from asserting your own dignity and strength while letting the other person see the consequences of their arrogance. And so, as I closed the door behind me and let the night settle, I felt a quiet, lasting satisfaction. Not the burning thrill of revenge, not the fleeting joy of humiliation, but something deeper. The knowledge that I had acted with purpose, clarity, and precision. I had faced betrayal, turned the tables, and emerged not only intact, but wiser, stronger, and in control. The lesson was complete, and the world for one moment felt balanced once more.